Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Zaid Ibrahim podcast. Today we have another special guest, Mr. Nizam Bashir. He's an advocate and solicitor of more than 25 years experience. And welcome, Nizam.
Hi, Neto. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. And this is the first time I'm doing this Zoom with you.
Hopefully not the last as well.
No, definitely not. And today we're going to talk about law and particularly about judges, because I think this is a subject that I think not just lawyers, but I think members of the public are interested to understand a bit more. So, okay, I'm going to start by introducing to you this idea of being a judge. You're an experienced advocate solicitor, and as far as I know, in most countries in the Commonwealth, the pinnacle in the career of a lawyer is to be a judge. And that's a crowning achievement, as it were. Do you have this thought about being a judge yourself?
Well, I think most lawyers do entertain the thoughts of becoming a judge. But of course, sometimes they perhaps shy away to some extent because it may mean a bit more, you have to be a bit more disciplined in terms of who you interact with, etc. Because you don't want to be accused of being partisan because of your interactions with any particular member of the bar, for example. But I'm not saying that judges, of course, who are on the bench necessarily all have that same thoughts in their mind. Some are quite happy to mingle, former practitioners of the bar. I mean, I can think of Dato Anand Ponudurai, who was a former KL bar chairman. So I think it impacts on their thinking to be a judge maybe differently depending on the individuals. For some, they're still quite okay because they feel they can compartmentalize as to, how they are when they are on the bench and when they are off the bench. It depends.
But you yourself, do you have an interest?
I think if you're a student of the law, someone who loves the law, I think, naturally you would have that inclination.
Oh.
And
I take it that is a yes.
Yes, in not so many words, yes.
Okay, good. Because I can tell you from my little research, there are so many vacancies now, Nizam. I understand from my information that, we now have about 100 judges of the superior courts,
Yes.
and about 41 or 42 judicial commissioners, I'm not sure. But there are also 41 vacancies. And can I suggest that you apply to the Judicial Appointments Commission?
Yeah, I didn't see that question coming.
No, I think you can. I think that I remember there is a provision in the JAC
Yes.
that any lawyer or anyone for the position of the judicial commissioner and high court judge, I think you can apply. You don't have to wait to be invited.
Yes.
So I suggest you do so.
I will take that suggestion on board.
Yeah, I think I would like to have a friend who's on the bench. The reason I ask you this question is because I think it is such an important job to be a judge. I mean, to be able to decide on justice. In issues of liberty, of rights, whether for ordinary people or for the people in high places. It's a very important job to be a judge. And I remember many years ago, some 35 years ago, Nizam, 35 or so years ago, I was also invited to be a judge. Do you know that?
I never knew that.
Oh, I was surprised myself. But I turned it down immediately. Simply because, unlike you, I wasn't concerned about the social impact of the appointment.
Right.
There are two things that made me decline immediately. Was because, one, I'm just a lazy type. I mean, I don't work so hard. I don't like to go through voluminous documents and evidence and notes and take notes. And in those days, there was no recording, Nizam. Everybody had to write it down. And I used to watch these judges play at work, and I said, my goodness, what a tedious work. So that alone is kind of, because of my disposition to be lazy, I also say no. I mean, I was honored, but I didn't accept it. Second reason is, of course, that time, Nizam's salary was atrocious. I think it was very low. I don't know how much they pay judges now. I heard maybe High Court judge, maybe, I don't know, 25,000 or so, I don't know, 30,000. But in those days, it was a lot less. And I said, no way. I'm quite I like to party around in those days. So I can't live with that kind of salary. So but some people, they told me that, if only I had done my service, so-called, to the country, but I should have accepted it. But anyway, I mean, that's over. But I still think that lawyers and people who are in practice for a while, because there's so many judges are from the civil service, as you know, in our country. I think 70% or so of our judges are from the judiciary, from the civil service, And I think there should be a balance. So there should be more lawyers from the private sector with different experience, with varied experience, commercial experience, who will make the judiciary stronger. How do you get the private lawyers to join in? What can you suggest something?
Well, I think perhaps one of the other issues beyond that point I made about your social circle being a bit more circumscribed. I think salary, of course, is another question. And maybe, given even how inflation is in our country today, maybe that's something that can be relooked at, reconsidered. But in any event, of course, I think when you're talking about serving in the judiciary, it's effectively national service, in my view. Yeah. So I think if you think about it from that perspective, maybe one can forego maybe some of the nicer perks of being a private practitioner, and perhaps consider serving the nation.
Yes, but I also think that I think the government should also increase the salary of judges.
Yes,
I know there is this what they call the judges' remuneration order, that sets the salaries of the superior court judges. But from my recollection, I mean, the salaries are quite low, very low, in fact. I mean, if I look at the Singapore judges, some of the people I know in Singapore, my goodness, there's so much marked difference, in salary, the disparity.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's the latest figure. I think our Chief Justice probably earned less than, without taking into account the allowance and all that, but I think the basic salary is probably very low, 35, 36, 38,000, something like that.
Thereabouts.
Yes, and I think I would recommend the government set up a proper commission, a proper judges commission, remuneration commission, and give our judges a fair salary.
That's right.
I mean, it is a lot of work. I mean, I'm not a court lawyer, but I can imagine from what I can see, it's a lot of work, and of course you have to do your best. You have to be impartial. You have to be independent. You cannot be seen to be biased. You cannot be, all those attributes you need. I would suggest urgently that the government sets up a remuneration order. Commission, to decide what is the proper value to be actually offered to our judges. What do you think?
Yeah, I think certainly it's high time we reconsider that, because beyond purely looking at it from an inflationary perspective, I think we need to keep in mind that we want judges to basically be forthright, have integrity, and part and parcel of making sure that they are not sort of tempted by any other things. You make sure they are well taken care of in every sense of the word.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I hope that, yeah, well, somebody in the higher up listens to our podcast.
I'm sure they do.
Now, I also want to come back to you this on this subject of the recent reports about, the concerns expressed by about judicial interference, on the appointment of judges, of the Superior Court judges, and you notice that the former president of the bar, 9 of them, issued statements, expressing concern about this so-called interference. And this, I think, stems from the fact that, our Judicial Appointments Commission, in respect of the Superior Court judges, the JAC can recommend for any vacancy, a name of one person, whether it's Chief Justice or Court of Appeal President, whatever. But the Prime Minister can ask for 2 more, if I can recall. Now, if that happens, then there'll be a lot of lobbying to the Prime Minister, because he can practically say, give me 2 more names, and then 2 more, Now, I think the JAC should be amended in this respect, because I think whatever name given by the JAC should be the name that the Prime Minister take it to the King. I mean, that's why I thought that would have been better. What do you think? Or do you think the Prime Minister should have some flexibility?
Well, I think this notion of there just being one name, I don't know whether that therefore, lends proper meaning to the decision-making process ultimately that's needed to be made, either by the Prime Minister making the recommendations to the King. Because if you just have one name, there's no sense of deliberation, I think. I do note that the concern expressed is about there being lobbying, etc. But ultimately, I think if you are looking at the names that are being given, they should speak for itself. Forget about lobbying. If you're talking about decision making, at the end of the day, if the names in question have done their work over the years, you're not just talking about 1 day, 2 days, one month.
Of course.
Yeah. So they would have done the work. They would have, the name should be speaking out, shouting, their very sort of ability to serve that post with all the requirements that post requires.
So am I correct to say that you would say that the Judicial Appointments Commission, which has about 8 or 9 members, I don't know, they would have deliberated on the name, right?
Sure.
So whatever name they put forward should be the name that should be accepted, no?
Well, I'm sure that there would be maybe merits to the respective names that are put forward. And ultimately, as opposed to there being one name, I think we should allow for that sense of division to the camps that are respectively there within the JAC itself. If there are 2 names, so be it. It's fine. And I think then that decision-making process has got to be made. I have a bit of a concern if it's merely one name, because, I'm sure if we talk about candidates, that, potentially there's more than one candidate that should be deserving of that nomination.
Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, let me ask you this. So if I give if I am the JAC, I put one name to the Prime Minister. He says,
Yes.
I don't want this name. I want 2 more names.
Yes.
All right. So I then deliberated on it, and then I gave 2 more names.
Correct.
What is that preventing him from saying, no, I want another 2?
Well, of course, if you talk about the Prime Minister saying that I should have the discretion to decide amongst a list of names, it's within the scope of his discretion, I suppose, to ask for that.
Then why do we need JAC then?
Well, the JAC will then recommend, for whichever names to set out the merits of the names that are being put forward. Okay. It's not. I don't think they are there to just say, look, this is the only candidate that we find. There's no other candidate. I find that a bit surprising, because, as I said, when I look at the present list of judges that are up there, there's probably more than one candidate that seems to be deserving of it. Seems to be, at least from my perspective.
All right. Okay. So, but you still have to deal with the issue of so many vacancies. Why is that?
Well, I
I
think
mean, the Court of Appeal today, I think, in the federal court, I think they have so many vacancies.
correct.
And there are I think maybe 40 vacancies all over the place.
Yes.
So something's not working.
Well, I think maybe there may be a little bit more, maybe a bit more care taken where the appointments are concerned. If I'm being, um, I suppose, a bit diplomatic where that appointments are concerned. And which is okay if generally parties are operating from that perspective. But I think, Dato, your point is, look, there are vacancies. You need to make a decision. You need to make the appointments.
Yes.
I think we can't run away from that. Justice, the wheel of justice in the first place, it turns a bit slowly. COVID happened. We had about 30,000 cases of backlog, at least in the Kuala Lumpur and maybe the Klang Valley. And that's a huge number.
Yes.
So I think these appointments needs to be dealt with urgently, and I think we can't be too perhaps being overcautious where the appointments are concerned.
Yes, I agree with you. I think there should be a speedier, I think that we have, unfortunately, Nizam, we have backlog of cases. We have backlog of judges too, in that sense. We shouldn't be, I mean, backlog of cases, it's all interrelated.
Okay.
If you have shortage of judges, you're going to have backlog of cases. COVID or no COVID, you know what I mean? So, yeah, so we expect some urgency in dealing with this matter, Okay? All right. Now, the other thing that I want to ask you is this. This retirement age, Nizam, the Constitution says you retire at 66 plus 6. I don't know why plus 6. And I thought that is a bit young for someone clever or someone, a bright mind to retire. I mean, if you look at the Supreme Court of the United States, they're there for life until they are no longer able to function. And even in Australia, it's 70 now, I think. And even in the Supreme Court in England, I think 70 is the retirement age.
Increase to 75 now.
No, 75. No, everywhere else is trying to keep the bright minds, the working mind. We seem to want to dispose them early, like a civil servant. Don't you think we should change it?
Well, I think certainly if you look at the trend of retirement ages for judges being increased, if you look at, for example, UK, as I mentioned earlier, so they increased it in 2021 from 70 to 75.
Yeah.
US Supreme Court, as you rightly noted, Dato, it's for life. Australia, New Zealand, it's 70 years, but even then there's a proposal to increase them to 80 years old. And I think if you start even looking at it purely from a life expectancy perspective, of course, life expectancy maybe in the 50s and 60s was extremely different compared to what it is today.
Of course.
You're talking about maybe 85 being the expected life expectancy now. So why are we still retaining a sort of a very archaic retirement age of 66? Leave alone the fact that there's a very curious 6 months extension. Yeah. So in Singapore, for example, we actually have got similar retirement ages for judges. Singapore, I think, is 65 when I last checked. Malaysia is 66. But of course, there are reappointment provisions in Singapore. And the reappointment provisions is not necessarily for 6 months.
Yeah.
Here, ours is just merely an extension of 6 months, pursuant to Article 125. So it's something that we need to look at, not just in terms of how the reappointment, the very short tenure where reappointments are concerned. We also need to look at the retirement age itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are a lot more reasons as to why I think we should consider, extending the retirement age beyond purely life expectancy. You talk about cost savings. You don't have to, sort of train these newly appointed judges. You have someone who's got all the wisdom with that person. And as we discussed earlier, you talk about judicial shortages. These are judges with experience. They can deal with much more cases with much more speed because of the experience that they have with them. I think we also need to try and retain the experience of these judges, the expertise of these judges. So there's a lot of arguments for, and of course I can also see from another perspective, there are also some arguments against, but if I weigh the two, I think it still makes more sense to increase the retirement age for our judges. I mean, you talk about our prime minister. We had a prime minister who was 90 something.
Oh, he's going to be a prime minister again, maybe 100.
But of course, if you look at our present Chief Justice in Malaysia, there's a lot of good that's being said about her. And it's very unfortunate, that if you go by the present iteration of the provisions in the Constitution, she has to retire unless she's given that extension.
Yeah. Okay. Now, our members of parliament, I don't see them talking so much about these issues, I don't know whether they realize, I'm talking to them now actually. It's not easy to get good judges, It's just like it's not easy to get a good wife. It's not easy, Don't you think so?
Definitely. I mean, look at the shortages that we have at this juncture.
Yeah.
It seems like they're finding it difficult.
Yeah, no, but you can tell when you appear before a good judge and a smart judge and not so good and not so.
Sure.
You can tell, and I would say that the good ones, the excellent ones, are not so many, and therefore you have to broaden the net. You have to, and once if you find them, then you must keep them. I mean, I think that is only logical, and this is where I said, that if they say that the rot in a fish starts in the head, equally, excellence or good behavior, good conduct, good judges starts from the head as well.
Sure.
So it is only I thought inevitable that we have good judges at the apex level, because that will translate to selecting good judges down the line. Now, but judges cannot advocate for themselves this sort of thing, because they're supposed to be like, prim and proper, They're supposed to be prim and proper. And the Bar Council today as we speak, is mute, So who speaks for them? Who speaks not for them, but who speaks for the welfare of the law, of the importance of the judiciary? Who speaks for them? Don't you think that members of parliament should be more active?
Well, I think certainly members of parliament do play a role, but I think beyond members of parliament, those who are essentially interested in the state of our laws in Malaysia, they must also speak up. And of course, I agree with you that the guardians of the law, which is our judges, it is important that we ensure that right candidates are being selected, and we need to scrutinize even post-appointment, the decisions that they are making. And there should be, as long as it's done respectfully, there should be some amount of leeway in terms of comments being made. I mean, the good part is we have got a very vibrant sort of, atmosphere where social media is concerned. And you do have some good legal commentators. So not just members of parliament, I think all of us must play our part, must ensure that we get the right individuals up there, And of course, members of parliament, certainly, I can't think of anyone else who must play that role. I mean, certainly when you're talking about debates in parliament, etc., they must make sure.
Yes. The other thing that I want to raise with you, we still have some time, is this, what I call but the attributes of an independent judge. I want to bring up with you this issue of what sort of qualities do we need to be independent. Generally speaking, of course, we know that he or she should not be influenced by external factors. He decides based on the facts and the law. But, okay, because most of our judges, their background, their experience of course, has bearing on their thinking, on their value system.
Sure.
So if they come from the government sector, most of them, don't you think they are more inclined in their interpretation of the law to be pro-government? Because we are all human and we are influenced by all sorts of things, our education, our background, the old boys club, the schools we come from, these are factors. So I think that the reason I raise this is because I find that on one issue, on the issue of freedom of speech, I sensed it that the every time this issue was raised in the courts or somewhere, where are the limits of freedom? Invariably, most of them, the judges, would say, "Oh, freedom must have limits. There's no absolute freedom." Fine, but who decides on the limits? If you are kind to go follow what the government sets, the limits, the threshold, you will never get freedom, because no government in the world, particularly this government, our government, nobody wants to extend the threshold. They're going to have a restrictive view of freedom. Now, and because our judges, as I say, are primarily from the civil service, that's why I think we tend to have a very restrictive view of. You look at the issue of Peaceful Assembly Act. I remember that there was only 12 years we passed that law, or for 15 years. And I thought the provision, if I read it, is very clear. I thought it's very clear. And that you don't need approval. You just need to notify. But the police, for some reason, and I'm sure if you go to court on this, but going to court is an expensive affair. And every time you go to court on the issue of freedom, you always come up with this: freedom has limits. But no one wants to address the issue who draws up the limits. I would have thought that the judges should be more brave, I think, in this regard, because I think if you don't have freedom of speech, there's no democracy.
Right. Well, I think if you look at, firstly, public law cases, testing the limits of fundamental liberties.
Yeah.
We have had some wins, we've had some losses. But I agree with you, when you're talking about Part 2 rights, you're talking about fundamental liberties, it shouldn't be treated as if it's, sort of a addendum, as it were,
Yeah.
to the rights that a citizen has. Yeah. So it must be a bit more robust. You must be very enthusiastic, if I can use that word, when you're talking about fundamental liberties being protected in Malaysia. But here it's almost the reverse. It's almost as if, there should be deference to the government almost in every respect where fundamental liberty issues are concerned. It shouldn't be that way. Yeah. And maybe arguably the reason for that is, I suppose if you come from the judicial and legal service, if you come from the civil service, the mindset may be pro-government to some extent. But I prefer to encourage, I suppose, the focus to be on how the jurisprudence is in more developed countries. I think the focus should be there, because then we begin to see it's more rights-based, rights-oriented, and I think there's a greater willingness to ensure that fundamental liberties are protected jealously, as opposed to being some sort of addendum, which is just by the by in some footnote. It's not like that. Yeah. So, and I think we need to ensure from time to time, when we have very important cases, that debate, that dialogue must continue, because I can certainly at least concede, maybe it depends on the context to some extent, but when you're talking about public assembly peacefully, I think we need to be extremely careful. We need to be more pro-rakyat as opposed to anything else, because when the rakyat goes to the ground, I'm telling you, in the first place, it's not easy, because if you're talking about the way how the net functions, almost it has become almost the street by which everyone demonstrates on the internet,
Yes.
first and foremost.
Yes.
So when the riot goes to the ground, it's a whole different thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm sure the hope is also that our judges were in tune with the mood in the country, as it were, in the world, you know. And as much as we know they have a very secluded life in a way, but we still expect them to be in tune, you know.
Yes.
Now, before we end, I just want to raise you another point, which was a good point raised by the former Chief Justice, you know, Tun Arifin, you know. He said that we should have the legal and judicial committee. Now we have judicial and legal service sort of combined, you know, the Chief Justice and the Attorney General kind of control.
Right.
It's almost like a Rojak structure in my view, because, you know, the Sessions Court and below are basically subservient to the AG.
Right.
And yet they are part of the judiciary.
Right. Right.
You know? So if you go and ask for remand, or rather the police go and ask for remand, do you think that the Sessions Court or the magistrates will refuse? Because the DPP is also part of the colleagues asking for it. So I think Tun Arifin suggested that we have that the High Court judges and the courts all headed by the Chief Justice. And you don't mix the two. And I thought it was an excellent idea. And why can't they do that? Why can't the government do that? Let's separate the judges from. So what I'm trying to say is, let's put everybody, magistrate, Sessions Court, whatever, High Court, everybody who would preside, who arbitrate, who in cases. That's part of the judiciary. He comes under the Chief Justice. And not the Attorney General, because the Attorney General is the government.
Yes. I in terms of principle, I don't see why it's a problem to sort of separate the two, systems from one another. Certainly, I think if you talk to criminal practitioners, for example, when you talk about abuse of remand orders, we talk about some of the peculiar orders that seem to be given, not necessarily, out of any other reason other than the fact that maybe there's a particular view as to how the law is supposed to function. I think it's healthier, perhaps, that the interaction be amongst the judges, that the bosses effectively be judges themselves, as opposed to anyone from the AG's chambers having, that sort of a reach over at least the subordinate court judges. So if you talk about separating the system for that reason, I don't see a problem. No problems.
But why the reluctance to change it?
Well, I suppose, if the system works for the government, there's no incentive for them to disturb how the system works. But it's not good for the rakyat, in my view, and it's not good for the law as such when you have something that doesn't perhaps operate more consistently with separation of powers, etc. So I'm looking at it purely from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sometimes I think that these are not changes that is going to rock the nation. I mean, it's not like going to make PAS upset or DAP going on a rampage suing everybody. It's not going to be like that.
Yes.
So I would have thought that it's something the government should just do it for the good of the system, and yet even that we find it difficult.
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we are supposed to have a reformist government. So let's hope that this is one of the key areas of reform that we can look forward to.
Nisam, you are a believer. I can see that.
No, I'm not. I'm just being very cheeky about it and being very polite about it.
Yes, well, never mind. I think, okay, I'm going to come to the last bit of our conversation this time. And this is, I remember a couple of years back, there was a lot of angst. There was a lot of, not anger, but disappointment expressed by people in the East, Sabah, Sarawak. Because as you know, we have a Chief Judge of Malaya and a Chief Judge of Sabah, Sarawak. This is historical kind of baggage, I would call it. We don't have a Chief Justice of Malaysia. We do, but generally it comes from Malaya.
Right.
So there was this talk about why is it that people from the East never take that position of Chief Justice. It's almost like, is it a political thing, or is it because lack of suitable candidates? It can't be. I don't know. So, but it is still, even now, they're still talking about appointments of, judges, judicial commissioners and all that. Why don't we get our input, they say. People in Sarawak will be asking that, and Sabah. So, this is again one area, I think. We should not let it fester, I think there should be some effort being put in place to streamline our system so that there's not too much differences between the two systems.
Right.
Yeah. But do you have any connection with Sabah Sarawak? I mean, like your friends, the lawyers there? What do you think their views are?
Well, I think I don't know whether that complaint is necessarily true, given the fact that we had Tun Richard Malanjung just about one CJ ago, who effectively was at the apex of the judiciary. But I agree with them. If you talk about, at least statistically speaking, in terms of the numbers of appointments coming from East Malaysia, it's not been as much as the ones from West Malaysia. Yeah. But I want to.
You don't think you don't think Richard Malanjung is an aberration? It's just like Tommy Thomas is an aberration. You don't think so?
Well, I think he is, but let's put it this way: he must have been quite exceptional in some respects to deserve that appointment, and I think we should celebrate exceptional individuals coming up there wherever they come from, whether from police all the way to some place in Sandakan or even Tawau or even Kuching, for example. No problems. As long as they are exceptional, I think we should welcome any nomination of such an individual to helm that post. It's a very important post, not just for West Malaysia. It's a very important post even for East Malaysia. Yeah. And I don't know whether using those terms West and East is necessarily politically correct, but I think ultimately I don't sense any disconnect when I use that word. It's just I look at it purely from a geographical perspective. Yeah. I just want, at the end of the day, whichever individual we're talking to be CJ to be, as good as all the notable CJs that we've had over the years.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm all for that. When I use the word aberration, I was referring to a political influence on this decision making.
I see.
So it's not about the ability of the person.
Sure.
So I'm concerned that there's too much politics in the appointment of judges.
I see.
And that's why I think that's why most Chief Justices are from Malaya, except for Richard.
In that sense, okay.
In as much as I think Tommy Thomas will be probably the only Indian Attorney General for a while.
Right.
Not because there are no good Indians, but because of politics. So, and I think we should not, we hope that will not prolong. I think politics should not play a role too much in all these appointments. That's what I'm trying to say, And I think we should try to reduce the political input in the selection process. I don't know whether that is naivety or what, but that's what I hope the country can go forward with,
I prefer to look at it this way. Ultimately, we are talking about Malaysia, the nation.
Yeah.
I think if the focus is purely on politics, it's going to be a problem. There's so much of challenges that is out there now, and I think we need to ensure we pick the best candidate for the country.
Yes, and not just judges.
In every sense of the word, whether it's judges, whether it is Chief Justice, etc.
All right, I'm all for that. So Nizam, thank you very much. I think we now reached our time limit.
Sure.
And if we speak any longer, nobody's going to hear us. So it's very nice talking to you, and I hope we can talk about other things later on in the near future.
I look forward to that.
Thank you, Nizam. Thank you.
Welcome.